Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, February 12th, 2025, and today we are going to be taking a look at two new sets of polls out of the states of Arizona and Georgia. Yes, you heard me correctly. I'm not making another video about Michigan Senate race, I promise you, but today's video is going to be focused a bit around the 2026 midterm elections and the limited but early data that we have that can help put us and orient us into the broader context of what the midterm elections might look like next November. Now, one thing to note, it is very early on in the 2026 election season. In 95% of races, the general election candidates have yet to announce that they are running in competitive open races. Senate races like the one in Michigan and the one in Georgia, and the governor's races across the United States, and one today we'll be looking at the state of Arizona. All of these candidates here are largely speculative, but do again ground us in understanding what it means for the future of Democrats and Republicans as they navigate a very interesting upcoming midterm election. And I use the term interesting to describe it because as of right now, Donald Trump is maintaining his advantage nationwide as a popular president with 3.3% more Americans approving of the job he's doing than disapproving. Entirely unlike the first term where after 7 days of Trump taking the oath of office, the approval rating went under and disapprove remained the majority for the rest of his presidency. But now the approve has maintained itself in an early honeymoon phase for Donald Trump that is typically experienced by incumbent presidents for anywhere from 6 months to a year. But in this case, it is unlike Donald Trump because it is very rare at any point in time that approval or favorability be this positive for the incumbent president. And a lot of that is sort of coming through in a lot of these preliminary polls. It gives a vision of what the future of the parties might look like if Donald Trump maintains a level of popularity similar to where he is right now. Allow me to show you the data. Keeping in mind that Donald Trump currently holds a 49% approval rating nationwide, the data out of Arizona and Georgia are not so great, for Democrats to put it lightly. In the Georgia Senate race here, there is high speculation that Brian Kemp, the incumbent Republican governor, is going to run for this race. That's against incumbent Democrat Jon Ossoff, who would be up for re-election next November. Now, Brian Kemp, who has really relished in the fact that he holds a very high approval rating amongst his constituents and comes in from the 2022 election having outperformed the Senate Republican candidate by nearly 10 percentage points across the state, Georgia is expected to be amongst the closest Senate races in November of 2026. But it might not be all too close if Donald Trump holds his approval rating. Right now, Brian Kemp leads Jon Ossoff in a hypothetical matchup by a whopping 7 percentage points across the state. Brian Kemp, who would be polling and is polling quite well, is doing well in this hypothetical matchup against the incumbent Republican, holding an advantage with nearly 50% of the vote at baseline, while Jon Ossoff remains at 42%. Now, the Georgia Senate race has always been one that is uniquely interesting because the Republicans have pretty much held this advantage even before Trump was inaugurated for a second time. The 16th of January, Politico released an article showing that a GOP poll showed Kemp beating Ossoff in a hypothetical Georgia Senate matchup, and we sort of knew that this was coming. Brian Kemp, again, being term limited, cannot run for governor again, has been clear that he has future political ambitions. Now, whether that means he wants to run for Senate or run for president, chances are he runs for something, and if I was to put my money on it, he wants to end up in D.C. the easier way, which would be through the United States Senate election. But again, before Trump was inaugurated, Donald Trump, not being someone who we had an approval rating of as, the president of the United States, Biden was still in office here, Jon Ossoff was still losing to Brian Kemp. Surprisingly enough, or unsurprisingly, given Trump's approval rating right now, Brian Kemp expands his lead to a 7-point delta instead of 6 in just roughly 2 weeks. Now, I'm not going to put all of my weight into one individual poll, but it's starting to become a warning sign for Democrats that consistently there are data points that suggest that Senate Democrats, Senate Republicans, are in different positions than in any of the past 3 cycles, 2018, 2020, 2022, 4 cycles rather, and 2024. Arizona also reaffirms a lot of what I've understood about the races so far. In a head-to-head race between Karen Taylor Robson, who currently, or Robeson, please correct me if I'm mispronouncing her name, but right now Donald Trump has endorsed this Republican, and she is running for governor, announced it today, actually, and it looks like the head-to-head data so far is putting Katie Hobbs at roughly a 2-point advantage. Now, you might be looking at this and saying, okay, this is good so far for the Democratic Party, but I will say this. A lot of the reason why Katie Hobbs is doing well is because she has universal name ID across the state, in the way the Republican does not. Take a look at that not sure column. 24% of Republicans are not sure. 35% of independents are not sure. But when it comes down to who's getting more of the independent support, Karen Taylor Robson is at 39% of nonpartisans or independents. Katie Hobbs at just 26%. In a state like Arizona, if we were to push all the rest of the groups together, this is actually a losing number for the Democrats, and so far, not a great sign. But even a more grim sign is that Andy Biggs, who currently serves in the U.S. House of Representatives, who is actually seen by many members of the left and even of the right as far more pro-Trump and far more extreme than Karen Taylor Robson, is leading Katie Hobbs. Why? Because of that massive name ID, where only 6% of Democrats are unsure, and contrary with 9% of Republicans are unsure. And although Katie Hobbs is getting some support from the Republican Party, largely because Andy Biggs is as extreme as Kari Lake and Blake Masters and other Republicans who have lost in Arizona in recent memory, he is still beating Katie Hobbs. A big reason for that might be that Trump won the state by 6 points in the last election. Sometimes it's hard to win races, especially given that Katie Hobbs only won the last election by roughly 1 point. While it was an impressive showing, 2026 is certainly going to be competitive. So let's look at it on a map standpoint. Let me go ahead and mark in all of the incumbent Democratic senators so you can see just how grim the Senate math actually is should Democrats be unable to win an election so far. Taking a look at where we are, if we're characterizing all of the states the Democrats currently hold, Republicans, it's 53 to 47. Putting Republicans at a pretty good position in terms of Senate control. For Democrats, they're hoping that they win a state like Maine, but let's not touch it for a moment. Let's take a look at what the data is telling us and then work our way from there. Well, in a hypothetical, thankfully for Democrats, Arizona's not up, but Georgia is. And in this circumstance, Georgia isn't particularly close. Donald Trump won the state by 2. Brian Kemp won in the last race in 22 by over 7 points. Chances are, based on this poll, if we were to just run it through the election, would win by 7 as well. But it doesn't just end there. I told you guys I wouldn't spend too much time talking about Michigan in the future, but I want you to take a look at what the data tells us so far about Pete Buttigieg, who is the current Democratic frontrunner. You know him, Secretary of Transportation. He's currently losing to Mike Rogers, the 2024 Republican nominee, not just by a point or 2. But by 6 points across the state, 47 to 41, largely contributed to the fact that Pete Buttigieg is not capturing in minority bases electorate, winning only 74% of the black vote, when Democrats, historically speaking, have won anywhere from 90 to 91%, especially to win in the state of Michigan. Looking at that, quite alarming for Democrats too. This poll also is being solicited by one of the best pollsters in the state. I mean, finding that Mike Rogers is leading Pete Buttigieg is very good news for the GOP. No way you cut it, because Georgia was supposed to be a swing state, and Michigan absolutely is. But the fact they share a similar margin means that if we were to throw the polls, through the election, to say this is how the trajectory will be, assuming the polls are correct, which are largely in line with what we're seeing, the fact that Andy Biggs is someone who has been perceived of and is as extreme as himself, can be in the victory, scenario against Katie Hobbs. I think about that, and it all sort of lines up because Donald Trump is approved of right now, because the Republican Party is holding far more party ID percentage amongst the American public than they did in years prior. I mean, all the things, the stars are lining up here for strong results for the Republican Party. And that should worry a lot of Democrats. Regardless, though, assuming the polls are correct, this is where we are with the Senate math. Democrats at 45, Republicans at 55. Now, Democrats are hopeful that they can make inroads in Maine and maybe North Carolina. But in reality, those states probably aren't going blue if Michigan and Georgia are going red. And beyond that, where does that bring them? Back to ground zero at the best case scenario, 53 to 47. Fast forward to 2028, the math just simply isn't there for Democrats to win back Senate control. And so I look at maps and numbers like this, where I really do question in so many different ways, how Democrats plan to slam dunk the 26 midterms, because it is becoming increasingly more difficult as the days progress. And I think there is absolutely a large level of support from the American public that might have gone for Democrats in 18 and even in 20 and in some capacities 22 on the state level. But on the national level, the Democrats have lost support since the last election. And that support is translating to an approval rating that is record high for Donald Trump, despite being historically low in the broad context of Republican and Democratic politics. And that truly is the only saving grace for Democrats right now. It means that chances are, based on history, that Joe Biden and Donald Trump are actually quite similar, where they start out in a honeymoon phase that might actually last 6 or 7 months, but eventually turns into a level of disapproval that is never rebounded. The first term was the exact same way. Taking a look at that average, started out in the positive and never left the negative. That matters. That makes a difference in midterm elections. November 2017, when Democrats slam dunked those Virginia legislative races, they slam dunked the New Jersey races. Where was Donald Trump's approval? At just 38%, disapproval at 57%. In 2018, when Democrats did quite well, where were we at? Double-digit advantage for Democrats in terms of Trump's approval. Even in 2020, although he did as best as he could to narrow it, what you found is that right before Election Day and around Election Day, Donald Trump was still disapproved of by 8% more of the nation than approved of. Translated to Joe Biden winning the national popular vote by 4.5%. And so while I do think there are good signs for Donald Trump and the Republican Party right now, it's not that it can't be overcome, and it's not that it won't be overcome. There's a very strong possibility both of these states vote for their respective Democrats November 2026, but they need time to work back to that. Because unlike where we were on February 12th, 2017, the country had practically written off a second Trump term. It seemed like it was a fluke because Democrats didn't invest in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and thus Hillary Clinton lost it, right? She lost. This time around, it was Donald Trump won. And so there will be a lot of questions for Democrats, especially should they nominate Pete Buttigieg? Will John Ossoff win the race here? All of these different questions, but I can guarantee you, at the bare minimum, competitive races in both of the states we've been discussing, and a super competitive race in the Arizona governor's race right now. But there's no other way to cut it. The Republican Party holds, although narrow, an advantage at this point. And Democrats need to do everything they can to make sure that this advantage doesn't maintain itself through November 2026. And while that may seem like it's far away and that anything can happen in American politics, that's right. Anything can happen in American politics. And Democrats could be switching places with the Republican Party, and that Republicans could be similar to 2022 and expand seats in the U.S. Senate, despite the national environment not being in their favor and swinging very heavily away from the incumbent party. Weird things happen on the national stage. Weird things happen in the United States Senate elections and House elections, and I'd encourage you to understand, generally speaking, we have nothing set in stone at this point. This second Trump era is unlike anything we have ever seen before. As similar as it might feel for many members of the diehard left, it is not too familiar for many members in the center, and not too familiar for many members who are elected officials, members of Congress, senators, all these people who have influence over how policy is changed. I'm sure that this feels very different for all the members in Washington, D.C., and as well as the campaign managers all across the country, because 2026 is going to look very different than 2018. The question is, to what degree, and in what direction, and to which political party? All I can say is, only time will tell. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top right of the screen, there's also a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.